Great. Welcome, everybody, to room 2. We have a great panel for you today, and I'm glad to see that Remo worked and everybody was able to make it over into this site. It almost feels like a real conference when we change locations. So before we get into our first session, I'd like to give a shout out to 2 of our sponsors, which we are very grateful for. The first is Great Mountain Technologies, because at GMT, it's all about compost. Since 1992, Green Mountain Technologies has been dedicated to helping forward-thinking organizations reduce their environmental footprint, save money, and produce high-quality compost. GMT is committed to making composting an approachable, affordable, and successful undertaking for organizations of any size. And I also want to give a shout out to Paint Care. Paint Care is a stewardship organization that operates 1,800 drop-off sites in 9 states for convenient paint recycling. Learn how to use up your leftover paint and recycle the rest of your paint at paintcare.org. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first moderator today, who will be introducing the session, and that's Anna Kavala. And Anna is a contributing editor at Biocycle, and she's received numerous industry awards for all of her hard work at the City of San Diego and beyond. And she's a fellow board member of the Zero Waste International Alliance and a dear friend of mine. So take it away, Anna.
Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, everybody. It's an honor to be here and great to be introduced. And Leslie, appreciate. We have a killer panel. It's going to be fast, have a lot to cover. And unfortunately, 2 of our panel members won't be here today due to health issues in the family. Luckily, nothing to do with COVID, but we are not going to be joined by Neil, Edgar, and Will Bax, unfortunately. But we'll take care of the rest of the group. So I would like to, at this time, I'm going to do a quick presentation about a panel, introduce them, and then we'll call them to the table. Can I have the slides, or do you want to get, who's going to do the slides? Hello? No? No slides? Hey.
That would be Jill. Jill, are you able? Oh no, that would be Todd Sutton. Todd, are you able to get the slides on?
While you're doing that, I'm going to keep going because of the time. So we have our first panelists. Maybe we can bring them aboard. And while we take care of the presentation, it's going to be Enzo. Enzo Favolino is chair of the Science Committee at Zero Waste Europe, been involved since 1990 in scientific and operation issues around management of organics, compost, and benefits of carbon management. He works at Scuola Agraria de Monza, a nonprofit research center based in northern Italy, and he's a contributor to develop a source-separated collection and composting in Europe and other countries in the world. Enzo is well known. Most people around the organic already know him. The second person that I want to introduce is our lady, Courtney Brown. She has been for 15 years working in political analysis and consulting in policy. Sustainable Economics Law Center. She's a co-founder and director of Common Composting Oakland, with a lot of experience. Is going to help us with the food diversion and carbon sequestration. The next one is Marvin Hayes. He's coming from Baltimore. He's a community compost leader there with the Baltimore Compost Collective program, and he does also has a program mentoring youth, training them about environmental issues and compost specific. And last but not least, the one that's known by most of us and doesn't like introductions, but Matt Cotton has over 30 years of experience in organic recycling industry as a member of U.S. Compost Council Certification Commission, lead instructor for their 40-hour compost operator training course, and co-founder and current board chair of the California Organic Recycling Council. So we have a very, very strong group with us. I don't see them on the table, and I don't see the presentation. So we kept going on. Oh, I see Marvin. Hello, Marvin. We're getting there. Matt, Courtney, Enzo, okay, Matt's aboard. Courtney, Enzo. We will be talking about the times that, as you know, organics one of the biggest generations that we have of waste, and very tied to climate change. Time where the world recognized climate change as a big issue, and luckily we're going to go back to the Paris Agreement soon, so we'll be good. We'll be talking overall about reducing food waste and surplus edible food donations, on-site compost and digester and community composting, compostable packaging, carbon sequestration, large-scale composting in IED, some issues with permitting facilities, and in California, the Airborne regs, and maybe in Europe, different situation, and mandates for haulers, residents, for residential and commercial pickup. We all know the hierarchy from the EPA, from the Brenda Platt from the Institute of Local Reliance, and from the Zero Waste International Alliance. The bottom line is divert, divert, divert. We use as much as you can. Organic we can use for energy and put it back on the soil, but never, ever, ever incinerate, and never do the waste to energy that they call incineration, but do the clean energy that we can do. In California right now, we have a plethora of regulations that are for climate change and for organic diversion. When you look at the map, it's incredible, crazy, but it's so good because it's forced us to think and move forward and set standards for different areas. It's almost like we have a perfect storm right now. You see the eye of the storm, and the eye of the storm, we have our recycle, the Airborne, and around that we have the nonprofits, the business, the local regulations, the haulers, the facilities for AD, the residents, the large composters, and the community composters all come together with science to make this happen. So it's a perfect moment for us, and we have the perfect panel to talk about that. So we're gonna start with our first topic now. But Courtney's not there yet. We're missing Courtney. The first topic is the diverting food waste to source reduction and surplus food donation. I don't see Courtney. We didn't have the slides, and I don't see the timer. So somebody can help me. I appreciate it. I'm going to pose the first question. Since Courtney is not there yet, Enzo, the first question is for you. What are the midterms plans for food waste diversion in Europe, and do they include any requirements for surplus edible food donation? And so please, 3 minutes for response.
Yeah, thanks. Humbled and honored to be the first one to feedback on that. Courtney, apologies. Mine was meant to be the silver medal, not the gold one. Anyway, Europe has got an agenda on food waste prevention. Of course, I would say, well, you know, Europe adopted a comparatively ambitious circular economy strategy, a program dating back to 2018. And in the Waste Framework Directive, there is a particular pitch on prevention in general. At Article 9, there are many mandates on member states, and one specific mandate is on adopting every possible action in order to prevent food wastage. This is intended to align with the Sustainable Development Goals as defined by the United Nations Environmental Programme. There is an aspirational target to reduce food wastage by 50% by 2030. It's only aspirational, so there is nothing legally binding, and that's the beauty and the weakness in that. But there is an additional provision which is stipulated by Article 9 itself, because the European Commission will consider by 2023 adopting a common and legally binding target for all the member states. In the past, we used to be 28, now we are 27 after the Brexit. Common legally binding target for food waste prevention. So this will be discussed by 2023, right around the corner. In the meantime, there are initiatives both at local levels. There are some domestic regulations which have been adopted by a few member states. France, they worded food wastage as a crime, whereas Italy, where I'm based, it's more with the nudge. You know, we tend to adopt the nudge theory, and we had a particularly successful food waste recovery and donation program. It covers also pharmaceuticals, not only food waste, but basically it tends to create the connections between the producers of food waste and the possible users of food waste, charity programs, and so on and so forth, but also simplifying all the bureaucratic stuff connected to recovering and donating food waste. With that, I would say I'm done.
Thank you, Lynn. So right on time. Courtney, thank you. Glad you're here now. So the question for you is, you're very involved with community composting. So community compost, could it be an available alternative to divert food waste from the landfill? And can it contribute to the fight against food insecurity that we're talking so much about it in underserved areas, receiving food donation to those sites? 3 minutes.
Thank you, Anna. I think it's been mentioned on some other panels yesterday about the food waste hierarchy. There is one that is promoted by the EPA, and there's also one promoted by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And I think most of us out there are familiar with this food waste hierarchy, with an emphasis first on feeding people and feeding animals. So where the food donation portions come in is that there is a lot of work that is going on in the food recovery movement. There is a lot of food that was edible at one point that was set to give to donation to underserved communities and has expired or become inedible in the process before it is actually distributed. And as we recover more and more food, there is room and improvement for efficiencies of getting that food to people while it still is edible. But that doesn't always happen. And so there's an excellent opportunity here to continue to use that donated food that has become inedible as a resource for then feeding local soil as well. So with the higher food waste hierarchy that's promoted by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, right under feeding food, feeding people and feeding animals is feeding local soil. So this is where community composting comes in, and in some of the work that I have done here in the Bay Area, been working with food banks, especially that are dealing with a lot of donation dumping. So this is, say, a watermelon that you didn't actually know was rotten on the inside until you cut it open. But we're finding at these food banks that they are now responsible for properly disposing of food material that comes to their organizations, but they are normally not a permanent organization with a permanent location. So they were really not able to sign up with service contracts with the local municipal compost programs. So they have to find an individual service provider, or there's an opportunity now for them to recover this resource locally on site. And so community composting actually in this aspect serves a really good type of activity that not only can they turn that resource, that food waste into a resource, but they can actually use it to ignite community gardens that are often located very close to food banks and actually grow more food and now be serving fresh produce at a food recovery organization that was grown there in that underserved neighborhood. So food security, there's a twofold part is, feeding people through what food waste is, but also feeding the soil so that soil can feed people healthy, fresh food. And so community composting is really a great opportunity to build a closer relationship between food recovery and local composting. Thanks.
Very good. The next topic is on-site composting digesters. So I'm going to start with Matt. Matt, in your opinion, what role does on-site composting, including on-farm composting, play in the success of the implementation of the California SB 1383, which requires by 2025 that we have 75% of organics diverted from our landfills? 3 minutes. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Appreciate the question. I'm really glad to be here. It's hard to believe that we were going to be doing this in March of 2020, just up the street in Berkeley, and here we are so many months later. But we're still talking about composting. It's still super important. For those of you who don't know, you were watching the last session, Jared Blumenfeld explained what an SB is. It's a Senate bill, so 1383, and then when we use those codes, they become shorthand for the bill. It's the Short-Term Climate Pollutants Reduction Act. It's a massive paradigm shift for California. Hopefully a lot of it or some of it will get picked up in other states, pursuing ambitious goals to reduce food waste from landfills. And as Anna mentioned, it's got this amazing 20% reduction in edible food, or 20% increase in edible food recovery. So on-site composting, on-farm composting, our friend of CRA board member, Nick Lapis, and I, and Neil Edgar, who unfortunately couldn't be here, have always joked about the Lapis doctrine, because Nick always comes up with these crazy ideas that he hears about somewhere at conferences like this and runs them by us. And we usually tell them why they won't work and how they're not good. And we decided that in the end that we need all of these things. So yeah, I default to bigger systems, centralized composting, but that is not to say that the smallest community composting, the on-farm composting, on-site composting, all that is super important, plays an important role, probably a not well understood role in terms of education, in terms of outreach, understanding quality of compost. So the scale matters, and I'd rather see jurisdictions committing to their obligations under 1383, but that doesn't at all impact or disincentivize local community composting, on-site composting, on-farm composting. All that is super important, and it's all good. It all goes towards more composting. So I think it's great. I think you're seeing in California, because of the focus in 1383, also California has, and Courtney's involved with this, and maybe you can speak to the larger community composting grant that was just given. So California is very serious about this, and we expect to see growth in all composting. So how's that?
So let's segue with Courtney. Courtney, can you elaborate what Matt said? Also, from that food waste reduction hierarchy that you mentioned, what is the environmental benefit for a community composting? 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thanks, Matt, too, for that great segue. Because what we are realizing with community composting is that it's a great opportunity to connect with people directly and to work directly on building their relationship to making compost and to having that experience of following your waste through until it becomes a new resource. So the public education portion of community composting is extremely important. It also is a gathering space. So the program that was created by CalRecycle is called the Community Composting for Green Spaces program. And it is working to build decentralized and small scale infrastructure throughout the state of California over the next 2 years. And part of why they value and have put funding behind of it, because they do see this incredible opportunity for education, public education. Because the more people understand how to compost and to do it well, the more apt they are to have buy-in for supporting municipal compost programs at a larger scale, for be willing to pay the rate structures that will be required for that, and to also clean the stream so that they know exactly what goes in their green bin. So when we do consider doing this at a larger scale, that of effort will actually end up with less amounts of contamination, with more participation, and then we'll get larger results much quicker. So the real power of community composting is that we're usually that first point of connection in motivating people to pitch in and make a difference. Also, by keeping it small and decentralized, we're also helping to take a lot of the trucks that move a lot of this material off and make the collection a little bit more efficient. So community composting is usually done in hyper-local fashions within like a 10-block radius, and really small piles that are able to be controlled and managed. So we're seeing that reduces air pollution and other GHG emissions, which are really important to making a difference for climate change security as well. And then, of course, it's zero waste. It's really actually not wasting anything that we create in our community and turning it back into a resource that can benefit that community directly with jobs, with soil, with food. So there's a lot of benefits of community composting. That's just the tip of the
Courtney. Marvin, you are a big time community composter. What could cities do to support composting more. And I know you do a lot with the youth, involving them on that. How can we all work together to support that kind of work that you do, community composting and education of the youth for that?
All right, excellent. The first thing we can do here in Baltimore, because we have a lot of abandoned properties and abandoned lots, the city must make that available for community composting, for sites for community composting. They must pass legislation for any business who produces a lot of food scraps, to make it mandatory that they compost those food scraps. In order to get the zero waste or the path to zero waste, we must educate our young people so we can create our next environmental justice leaders to continue this fight when we're done. So what we're doing here in Baltimore, I'm going around through my OSI fellowship and increasing the knowledge of small scale composting through youth in that community. I'm in one of the most polluted communities in Baltimore City in the country, where the incinerator is causing $55 million in health damages. So my goal is to educate the affected youth of Baltimore City and increase their knowledge in small scale composting. Our campaign that we've been pushing in Baltimore City is Learn Compost. Learn so you don't have to burn. Starve the incinerator. Feed the soil, feed the community. So my intentional and deliberate action here in Baltimore is to spread compost fever and educate all of the residents and youth in Baltimore City to find another better way to deal with their waste and turn it into black gold soil enhancer to use to grow food. Healthy soil, healthy food, healthy community.
So I have some questions coming up. Some are not the topic that we discussed right now. So there's one here that we can talk about, everybody. As composting becomes more universal, what is the relationship in the roles of community composting versus industrial composting? Can community composting be scaled for widespread organic collection? And I will send that to Courtney and Marvin if it's okay with you guys. 1 minute for reply, please. Courtney, you got the mic.
Yes, I would say absolutely. Community composting is a viable solution to recovering our organic materials. I think when paired with larger systems, we start to get at the capacity issue. So at least in California, we're going to need about $17 billion and build 86 new facilities that can process over 500,000 tons of material per day in order to meet these zero waste goals, or with food waste reduction and methane reduction. So the more that we can provide that capacity at the small scale, which can get up and running much quicker with less infrastructure capital investments, we can start solving this problem quicker, especially in rural areas that are not easily serviced by more large-scale operators, as well as provide an opportunity in more urban areas where these facilities have not been developed yet in order to like really recapture areas where we are creating a lot of this material. So part of what I mentioned at the beginning was investments. I think that putting funding behind the small scale infrastructure really starts the impetus to get the bigger facilities going. And since we're not we're exempt from a lot of the permitting processes and the environmental impact reviews that go into larger facilities, we can do this more swiftly and efficiently just to get it started. Marvin, I'll hand it over to you to.
Oh, no problem. Excellent, Courtney. I'm just going to piggyback on a few things that you said. What we're doing in Recycle More, Maryland, partnering with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and the Baltimore Office of Sustainability, we're putting 3-bin systems and doing training for compost in every community garden so that we can educate. We cannot get to zero waste. We cannot do curbside composting until we educate what goes into that bucket and what you need to make black gold soil enhancer. So we are at a fast pace educating. I just came from going to Strength to Love Farm, creating leaf banks. So those materials don't go into the incinerators and landfills. So we are working to increase the knowledge of composting throughout the city by putting 3-bin systems in our gardens, in our local gardens here in Baltimore.
Marvin. Okay, I was going to give it to Enzo to give an international perspective. Okay, go ahead, Matt.
I just want to say, and first off, I think we need way more Marvin. I love the learn before you burn and let's catch compost fever. I think all of us here want everyone on the call to catch compost fever. So make sure that happens before you leave. I just want to say, and excellent stuff, Marvin and Courtney. I just want to say there's this real false dichotomy between community composting and large scale composting. I don't know how that started or why we care. It's all about composting. And there's, I think, inherent in a lot of the questions that we talked about in this panel so long ago, you know, this idea that, oh, there's not enough capacity and permitting is so hard. And I'm so tired of that discussion. The fact is, collection is hard. And collection is really the part that is keeping us from achieving the goals of 1383 or achieving greenhouse gas reduction, achieving more stuff composted. As Courtney said, we need so many facilities to meet the goals. We really need more collection. And I don't really care how that happens. Maybe it's your local hauler, or maybe it's your community group. Let's incentivize all of that and get it collected. Eventually, the two will blur because it's just the containers don't care, the trucks don't care. So let's just do that and not worry so much about who's doing it. Let's just do it.
Thanks, Matt. So let's go for the next topic, and then probably we'll other questions. The other topic is permitting facilities and dealing with air and water. That's for you, Matt. What are the most significant obstacles to permitting a composting facility in California? And are there any new regulations composters should be paying attention? What are the keys to develop a composting infrastructure in the US? And, you know, especially here in California when we have all the difficulties with the regulations. 3 minutes.
You see, this is exactly my point. And yeah, it's hard to permit a composting facility in California. It's hard to permit a gas station, California. It's hard to permit new housing in California. We don't have enough affordable housing in California. So yeah, urban areas are tough. So, but again, the hardest part of this is collection. So we've got to figure out how to incentivize the collection, the proper separation. And Marvin, you're 100% right. The hardest, and I think we underestimate just how hard, just what a significant undertaking it is to get super busy people that don't care about solid waste, maybe care abstractly about greenhouse gas reduction, but not specifically. We've got to make that connection and teach people that separating their food is in fact really important. No, it's probably not as important as putting on your seatbelt or keeping your second job or solving this pandemic, but it is important and we need to do it. So let's not pretend that's easy, and let's focus on the hard part, which is collection, putting the right stuff in the right bin, keeping the contamination out. Yeah, permitting's tough. There are some new airborne water board regulations in California. They're not relevant for anywhere else. I'm happy to talk to anybody about those if they're looking at setting up a facility. But we, as Courtney said and Martin said, we have places. We can do this at a community scale. We can do it on site. And of course, we can do it at large scale. It really gets down to gumption. And I think we have all the environmental incentive we need to do this all over the country, all over the world. Of course, Enzo and I both get to work in all sorts of places. And this is happening all over the world. We just need to make it happen a little bit faster.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to throw it to Enzo right now. So, Enzo, do you know of any examples of multi-scale composting policies or initiatives for cities or towns that can be replicated that you know in Europe that are doing so well for community, residential, urban, farm scale, or small business? That was the question. So maybe we can illustrate something from Europe, and I'll get one of you guys from here to say something too. If we can keep to a minute, that would be great. Thanks.
Oh, definitely. Well, basically, we have got a multi-level approach to that. We are promoting home composting in the gardens. We are promoting community composting. And in some areas, community composting is the key approach for managing organics. For instance, we have got particularly well-developed and designed community composting programs in the northern part of Spain, because it's mostly made of small villages, quite far from each other. And so go to a centralized facility. Then we have got large-scale industrial composting. The city of Milan, the groundbreaking example. I'm based near Milan. It totals 1.4 million people, and 100% of the population is already covered with separate collection of food scraps, which generates 145,000 tons a year of clean organics going to composting and anaerobic digestion. And in that case, we need centralized composting facilities. So the beauty of composting is that you can do that from the smallest side to the biggest one. It's very, very scalable, and this makes it lots of fun, basically.
Courtney, do you want to add something? A minute.
Yeah, I would just add that I'm seeing a lot of stuff go through about scaling here, and what we have is home composting is usually exempt from a lot of these regulations, and large scale facilities are very highly regulated. But there's this whole middle scale, which is the micro hauling portions, which Matt brought up earlier, which is the on-farm composting, which is the medium scale that can be done at resource conservation districts or on open public green spaces or in public parks. And so what we just need to consider is a kind of more tiered regulation system in facilitating composting at all scales and making it appropriate for the scale that you are trying to compost at. So best management practices for medium versus small, and also the potential partnerships that could exist, especially with the collections portion. I see a lot of that coming up. So micro haulers, at least in New York City, are working with the large scale haulers to make these routes density and efficiency more effective. So there are a lot of opportunities for partnership here, and there's a lot of opportunities for state and local agencies to support regulations in tiered in a tiered way, so that everybody can participate without it being overly burdensome for, say, some of the more small scale or medium scale actors.
Question for you. They were asking, how can composting avoid rodents and pest problems? So did you have any problems at community composting in locations that
Yes.
you are? A minute.
Yes. So you don't have, if you do composting the right way, as Courtney said, if you're trained properly, you're going to use 1/4-inch composting. We use 1/4-inch cloth for our composting unit. Here in Baltimore City, our recommendation for home composting is enclosed compost system. That way you don't have to deal with, I love to call, urban rabbits at your compost facility. If you use 1/4-inch cloth, a mouse can fit through anything bigger than a number 2 pencil. So you want to use enclosed compost system, 3-bin system. You can go to the Urban Farm Network. Big shout out to Linda and her husband for creating, but you want to use 1/4-inch hardware cloth. I don't think they've updated it. It has 1/2-inch, but 1/4-inch will allow so you don't have rodents, and you want to use a carbon filter for your smell. So that's 3 to 4 inches. You never want to see any exposed food in your pile when you're processing your food scraps.
Topic now. We're going to go for mandates for haulers and all residential and commercial generators. If time allows, we'll go back to more questions on this one. Okay. So Matt, you were first. So how does the Senator Bill 1383 impact the solid waste industry? How do you see that?
Yeah, I'll just spend a minute on this. I think it's significant. Obviously, that just affects California, but maybe some other places look to California for what we're doing. It's a major new ambitious goal to significantly reduce food scraps back to levels that we had in 2014. It's probably the worst time in history to try to roll out a program to aggressively go after food scraps, particularly from the commercial sector. Pretty tough time to ask restaurants to do mandatory collection programs, but that's where we're gonna come out of this, and that's what we're gonna do. I don't think the impact on the solid waste industry can be underestimated. It's going to take a long time. It's a paradigmatic shift, but we're seeing huge jurisdictions. Orange County, California, they run 2 of the largest landfills in the state, massive landfills. Well, because of 1383, they're shifting from using green material as landfill cover, and now the permitted composting sites on all 4 of their landfills. They have 3 active landfills, 1 closed landfill. All 4 are now doing composting. They just had a groundbreaking about a month ago. We just did a training. We've done training for their operators, because, getting to Marvin's question, training is the key to making excellent compost, preventing, vectors, rats, whatever you have it. So we have the technology to do this. But yeah, you're going to see people, and maybe particularly in Southern California, a lot more emphasis on collection, a lot more emphasis on processing that we haven't seen before. So it's huge. It's going to be a very big shift for a lot of jurisdictions.
And that, do you have any examples outside California that you recommended in the United States? And Enzo, the question go for you later in outside the United States. Matt?
Yeah, Enzo probably has better examples from outside the US. We do have some states, a few jurisdictions that are doing mandatory. I think mandatory is tricky, although people that are now doing mandatory would say, oh yeah, let's start with mandatory. I think it's easier to start with incentives, with a bill, but you need to have support at the highest level, whether it's an incentive, a mandate, whatever it is, with funding, with opportunities for folks to do it. I don't have specific examples. Obviously, New York City has been trying. They've had some struggles. Again, COVID's going to push all this back. Ironically, COVID speeds some things up, but it also slows things down. It's going to slow down the implementation of collection programs around the country. But we see it mostly, there's a real connection with population density. So you see it in the more population dense places. Places like Texas that do not have bans and are not going to have mandates on food waste are still leading the country in many ways in collecting and composting food scraps. So there's a lot of activity going on in a lot of states, even if you don't have the favorable legislation that we have here in California.
And so,
yeah, separate collection of the organics is a mandate for German authorities since January the 1st of 2015. Actually, it was already widespread across the country. The next big challenge for them will be to bite into the densely populated city center. It has been a mandate in the Netherlands since 1995. The best situation, I would say, is Austria. You were mentioning on-farm composting. They call it bäuerliche Kompostierung, composting done by farmers in Austria. They make local agreements and they say, you can make composting on our behalf because you have got the slabs, you have got machinery, you have got the interest in using the end product. So we can make a contract and you will run the composting initiative on our behalf. Austria is intriguing because the mandate is passed on each and every single household. So it's not only an obligation for the municipality to design the scheme, but also for each and every individual to take part either in separate collection or in individual composting programs. So this made Austria into the heaven for compost addicted people. Italy has got an obligation which was just stipulated, but we've already got 80% of the population covered with separate collection of organics, including food scraps, not only garden waste. But the best is yet to come because there will be a widespread, a common European obligation as of January the 1st, 2024, in each and every member state across Europe, there will be an obligation to separately collect the organics. So you can see a happy agronomist in front of you. Make an agronomist happy, do some composting. Yeah.
There's other questions, but I think we should move to the next topic, which is composting packaging. The questions are I'm going to pose for Enzo, Matt, and Marvin. So Matt, you are generally perceived as opposed to compostable plastics. Can you clarify your position, include your thoughts on the role of composting packaging related to the success of maximized organic diversion from landfills? And interesting, Enzo has a different experience in Italy, so that would be interesting. Matt, 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I think that was originally directed to our friend Will, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. I try to stay fairly neutral on compostable plastics. I think, though, if you heard David Pinsky this morning in the keynote address, he talked about moving away from false solutions. At the end of the day, compostable plastics, the vast majority are just single-use plastics. So that's not really what people in this space are very interested in. We're trying to reduce single-use plastics. And we spent a lot of time, there's been a bill getting a lot of attention in California, again, SB 1335, looking at which compostable plastics will be allowed to be purchased by the state. And the commission is looking at this because what decisions they make are going to have some very significant impacts on, I think, the development of compostable plastics in California, which obviously is an enormous market for these things. But at the end of the day, for me, and I think Enzo and I would probably agree on this, as an agronomist that he is, that I'm not, what we really want, the real value proposition of compostable plastics is that it's going to get composted. And unfortunately, there are tremendous amount of barriers. It's not just a collection vehicle for food to the compost site, right? It's got to also become compost. If it doesn't, I'm not sure what the point is. So given that, there's just tremendous barriers, the way large-scale facilities are developing in California with upfront separation, back-end separation, the odds of a compostable thing, a cup, a fork, actually making it through these separation systems to actually be composted is getting harder and harder every day. So you can talk about identification, which is hard. You can talk about organic certification, which is still a problem. You can talk about retention time, still a problem. So there's a lot of challenges, but to me, the biggest one is how does it actually get composted? And will it actually get composted, or is it just taking the scenic route to the landfill? If it's just taking the scenic route, the expensive route to the landfill, and I shouldn't get credit for that. My friend Kelly Schoonmaker came up with that metaphor, but I don't think that's helping. So if it, composters look at it, if it's a benefit, great. If it's a hazard, in the end of the day, if it's compromising the quality of the finished product, then we can't have it. And that's what the Oregon composters have decided. So I think the jury's still out, but we're coming towards a real inflection point about whether this stuff is actually going to be able to be composted in the systems we have.
Thanks, Matt. And so 3 minutes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what Matt said. They're not the solution to the plastic crisis, but I did a slightly different angle. We also are harshly fighting against them as the false solution to the plastic crisis, but we are supportive to considering them as a tool connected to separate collection of the organics. That's the specific use we consider for compostable plastics. Without the compostable bags, we wouldn't have made Milan into a city totaling 1.4 million people and 100% of the population taking part in separate collection program for food scraps, capturing 87% of food scraps. So only 13% of food scraps are going to the final disposal. Less than 10% organics in residual waste despite the concentration effect. So these are the hard numbers. With the compostable bags, we make the system more user-friendly. We tend to say, waste is like water, it always flows the easiest way. So we have to make it flow the proper way, and we have to make the system user-friendly. So they're not a solution to the plastic crisis. They are a tool connected to separate collection of the organics. So only for very specific and codified applications, we call them niche applications. Of course, we need solid and reliable standards. We have got one since 2002 in Europe, and I took part in definition of the standard on behalf of the environmentalist NGOs, which is EN 13432. It is not only accepted, but even promoted by the composting industry over here in Europe, because using the compostable bags, they get rid of the primary screens, which otherwise they would have to adopt in order to get rid of the ordinary plastic bags that people would otherwise use in order to make the system user-friendly. So it doesn't make any sense. So that's it. Not the solution to the plastic crisis, but an incredible tool in order to maximize the efficacy of separate collection programs.
Marvin, how does it, you see that in your community compost? Does it affect it? Do you see a lot? How do you deal with that?
Yes, well, I had to lean with the experts, Matt and Enzo, on this particular subject. But in my 6-bin system, I do not. I use my bags, my compostable bags. I compost those separately because I don't want to contaminate my black gold because it's used to grow food for residents who are living in a food apartheid neighborhood. So to make my quality of my product the best that it can be, I do those in a separate operation.
Go ahead, Enzo.
Just to top up what Marvin just beautifully worded, we are not supportive to use of compostable bags and compostable plastics in any individual composting program or community composting program. In that case, you just bring your own organics there with no use of compostable bags. They only make sense in curbside schemes to collect organics. And the European standard is for compostability at industrial composting sites, not in home composting programs. We are totally against home compostability. We are supportive to industrial compostability.
I have a question here that 9 people want to know, and I'm going to send that to you, Matt. Are there any compostable food containers, either fiber or bioplastic, that can truly get composted without PFAS or other environmental contamination?
Yeah, I saw that question. it's a complicated question. Again, I think we can get hung up on the fact on the compostability question. These materials, whether they're fiber-based or plastic-based, they're amazing marvels of engineering to be able to take a starch product and turn it into a fork that you can use in hot food, or a cup that you can take coffee in. That's an amazing achievement. And then to say, okay, it's going to compost. It's really hard, but it's not about the compostability. And the BPI, which is the organization which certifies the majority of compostable stuff out there, has aggressively and against the wishes of its members phased out PFASs. You're not going to see those in food service packaging much longer. I think that PFAS, in my opinion on that, I'm not a scientist, but that's a larger societal problem. We're going to be phasing that out for a lot of different reasons that have very little to do with composting. So you won't expect to see much of that left in food service packaging in the near future. So yeah, if you can get them to a composting situation, they will break down, and different materials, as Enzo said, there are standards, there are time frames, there are attention times. But the question is, can you get a person to use that coffee cup, for example, put it in the right bin, and get it to a composter who won't pick it out as a contaminant? Because the contaminants look a whole lot like the compostable stuff. So it's much, much more complicated than just the material type.
Thank you. We still have more questions. Moving on to the next topic, and we'll go back, okay? So next topic is sequestration. So start with Courtney. You participate in the marine carbon drawdown policy, right? And the process of designing the carbon sequestration policies. Can you elaborate on how it worked, about your experience, and what findings did you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Marin County in 2019 went down the process to identify priority initiatives to draw down carbon from the atmosphere. As part of that, I participated in a carbon sequestration group led by a partnership of Marin Agricultural Land Trust, the Resource Conservation Districts, the Marin Carbon Project, the Carbon Cycle Institute. And there were a lot of wonderful minds coming to this. Actually, Will Bax was on that panel in that group as well. I think he could also speak to this. But what we presented to the City Council was an initiative for carbon farming. For those that aren't familiar with it, carbon farming is a way of conducting agriculture so that it actually draws down carbon from the atmosphere and stores it into the soil. And this is important to do on several aspects: biodiversity, soil fertility, water retention, drought tolerance, pest tolerance. But mostly because the healthier that your soil is in the way that you conduct your farming, the more carbon that it will store down and draw down from the atmosphere and store for long periods of time. So the policy initiative that we presented and was preliminary accepted by the City Council was to grow the amount of farms that participate in carbon farming in Marin County from now until, I believe, 2040. To 180 farms. And if those 180 farms were supported with technical support, implementation, and funding, they would cover 90,000 acres of rangeland in Marin County and would sequester over 525,000 megatons of CO2 each year. So carbon sequestration is an excellent tool that we can use, and in order to do that, we need to increase the soil organic matter to get it to perform this miracle, and we do that with compost. So yeah, the more compost we can create, the more that we can spread it on rangelands, or likewise, the more that we can really ignite this solution.
Matt, can you please talk about the California Health Soil Program and what incentives are there for compost-based carbon sequestration? 3 minutes.
Yeah, great question. And building on what Courtney said, I want to talk about the carbon sequestration part first. There are tremendous opportunities, the work that John Wick and all of his academic partners have done. And it's fascinating to watch it spread both around the state, around the country, around the world. I was just giving a talk in Texas recently. Well, I was here, right here, giving a talk in Texas about this. And that's the kind of thing, again, Texas is not going to have a mandate on food waste reduction, but they do make a lot of compost. They have a lot of potential to put that on rangeland and working land range. It's the #1 land use in a state like Texas. So that's the kind of thing that can scale. There are projects in Colorado, all over the place. It's super exciting. And the challenge is going to be we don't have enough compost. That sounds like some compost hack advocate saying, oh, we need more compost. But the reality is we really do. And there have been studies done both at UC Merced and the work that I did for Cal Recycle showing we have lots and lots of markets for compost. And unfortunately, most of them will outbid carbon sequestration. There's a real opportunity to use the procurement requirement in SB 1383 to drive more compost onto rangeland and other things. That's already happening. Kelly's doing that in Alameda County. Recology is doing some of that in the Valley. So there's some exciting stuff happening with that. The Healthy Soils program, really quickly, there was just an excellent webinar that you can get off the CalCAN site. That's the California Climate Action Network. They just did a summary report looking at the last 4 years of the Healthy Soils program. That's a CDFA program. So since 2017, they spent $42 million over 640 projects, promoting about 30 healthy soils practices. So a number of things on the farm designed to reduce the impacts of climate change. Interestingly, over the 4 years, the $42 million of cap and trade funding, the #1 practice of all these things, 72% of all these 640 projects use compost. That's the most common tool that farmers under the Healthy Soils project use. And that's an amazing success that most people are not aware of. That report just came out. You can get off the CalCAN, just calcan.org website. Good stuff.
Thanks, Matt. And so what's the place of carbon sequestration and carbon farming in the Europe policies? 3 minutes.
Oh, there is an increasing role. Well, actually, this is another thing that makes my soul sink, basically, because I was one of the early promoters of carbon sequestration. We started drafting articles back in the late 90s and something like that. I was very young. I was only 5 when I started. Huh? So you can calculate my age if you so want. No, basically, now it is also officially mentioned in official reports and documents by the European institutions. For instance, a great study, a great report is the one done by the Joint Research Center, which is called Clean Soil, Soils and Climate Change, about the role of soils to store carbon and help fight climate change. Just because we know soils are the second largest pool of carbon in the world, in the planet, and therefore it's just so important to replenish carbon in soils so as to have in the total carbon balance much less carbon in the atmosphere. But now the big news are, this is specifically mentioned in the Farm to Fork strategy. The Farm to Fork strategy is a European streamlined strategy to have healthy food, healthy soils, and the carbon management is considered to be one of the new functions of agriculture. So they are now considering establishing carbon markets in order to reward the farmers. We brought it forward in the last few years because in Italy, we convinced 10 regions out of 20 regions to establish specific subsidy programs for farmers using compost, basing on the so-called rural development plans, because by using compost, they were helping us fight climate change, they were fighting eutrophication, desertification, and so they were benefiting to the community as a whole. And so we had already this tested reward instruments in order to get, to be catchy for the farmers to consider using compost instead of using chemical fertilizers.
And so for the last topic, and then when we finish that, we'll go back to some of the questions, okay? Large-scale composting and anaerobic digestion. So the questions are direct to Matt and Enzo. First question, do you think that building facilities with digesters and compost is the best way for us to move forward with the new facility? They have to have both, not just AD or not just composting. And why should we include composting with the AD facility? Enzo, do you want to go 1st? 3 minutes.
Well, we defined a position paper. Well, it's not a position paper, it's a fact sheet about choosing between composting and anaerobic digestion at ZWIA, at the Zero Waste International Alliance. I contributed to it. I'm particularly happy of that because it's providing decision-making tools to local campaigners, zero waste campaigners, zero waste advocates, decision makers, and so on and so forth. Basically, we leave the decision up to the local contextual conditions, because on the one hand, well, the environmental footprint of anaerobic digestion tends to be better because you keep carbon in the form of methane, and so you can use renewable methane in order to replace the fossil methane, which is great. But on the other hand, you have to consider other concurrent factors such as scalability, which is much better for composting, robustness. It's much more simple to manage a composting site than an anaerobic digestion site. I would like to draw your attention anyway, whatever the final choice, whenever you opt for anaerobic digestion. Oh, let me specify. In Milan, I already told you, we are collecting 145,000 tons plain food waste, and we've only got 10,000 tons garden waste, which makes composting hell complicated if you consider the proportions, you know, because you would need much more garden waste to act as a bulking agent. This is why Milan is considering the anaerobic digestion route. But anyway, what we always recommend, whenever you consider anaerobic digestion, always include a post-composting stage. Because if you go land spreading directly the digestate, it may cause more harms than benefits. Let me say that them in a nutshell. Phytotoxicity, because still volatile fatty acids and ammonia are released, which is phytotoxic. Release of ammonia into the atmosphere, which is a precursor of nanoparticulate in typical rural settings. Leaching of nitrates into the groundwater, which causes eutrophication and something like that, and pollution of the groundwater. So we are always supportive to post-composting stages whenever you consider anaerobic digestion. But apart from that, either or, we call it organic valorization, and both composting and anaerobic digestion in the European directives are considered as organics recycling.
Organic valorization, that's good. Matt, your take on that?
Yeah, 100% agree with what Enzo said. I think there's been, again, a myth, a goal, a desire to somehow co-locate anaerobic digestion facilities with composting facilities in the US. A lot of the technology we're borrowing, we're bringing over from Europe, from Germany and Italy, et cetera, hasn't worked out that way. Again, one of the earlier speakers talked about the shale oil revolution. Nobody expected natural gas to become so cheap in the US, and that's had a significant impact on the feasibility of anaerobic digestion projects. And again, it just hasn't happened that we've co-located, in most cases, anaerobic digestion with composting, you know, side by side. The very few that we do have are shipping the digestate. Some are doing direct land application, Enzo. Some are going to composting, but they're not. Very few are co-located. I don't know that matters. It probably hurts the economics again, because all the money, you know, the money is all in the collection and the tipping fee. Once you've done that, you don't have a whole lot of money left for composting. So hasn't really worked out. Doesn't mean it's not a good idea. I agree with Enzo. You should be composting digestate post digestion, but and most of it, arguably most of it is it's just being done offsite at a distance. I think there's a belief that we can site these things in urban areas, and to some extent that's been true, although there've also been issues with odors and other things. And composting sites tend to be more on the suburban fringe or really rural areas. So that's another reason we don't see them co-located.
Is that the situation of how difficult it is to site a facility in California, like everything else, but close to an urban area that would make sense in terms of the quality? Is that one of the reasons that you think it's kind of like,
I think, well, again, sorry, go ahead. I think the challenge, one of the things, I'm sure everyone else on the call, on the conference who's not from California, forgive me, but you know, we are blessed with these amazing, robust, diverse extensive agricultural markets. 65+% of our compost goes to agriculture. And so people forget, oh yeah, we can cite a big digester in an urban area, but we still have a lot of the solids that has to go somewhere. And most likely that's going to go to agriculture, which is mostly not in urban areas. So perhaps we didn't think through entirely the market situation. We got really excited about the shiny metal vessels coming over from Italy that Enzo was sending us. And we forgot that we should think about the markets as well. So.
Enzo.
Briefly put some icing on the cake. Typically, the combination of anaerobic digestion and composting is more expensive than straight composting. That's it. The economic driver for the interest in anaerobic digestion in Europe are the subsidy programs, because we have got the Renewable Energy Directive, which mandates member states to promote a certain percentage of renewable energy. Europe, just like the USA, I hope in the near future, is decarbonizing. You had stopped for a few years, but now you will speed up. We will start running faster than Europe. And we have got these subsidy programs, which make anaerobic digestion sometimes cost competitive to composting. But without that, it's bound to be more expensive. That's it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, our prices for electricity, our prices for disposal are just a lot cheaper than most places in the world. Australia has a I think last time I checked, it was something like a $70 a ton subsidy on landfill. That makes the economics so much better.
Since this is lively, just in 20 seconds, I'm sorry, Anna, but there is a fundamental issue to consider. We cannot afford very cheap landfills. And I understand that this is still the problems in most parts of the United States. This is not the situation anymore in Europe, because we have got the landfill directive that mandates pre-treatment before landfilling. So the impacts of landfilling are not anymore an environmental externality. They are internalized in the cost of landfill management, which makes both composting and anaerobic digestion cost competitive to landfilling. And that's why we are so much supportive to the landfill directive. Consider that.
Please let us know how we can get to that more expensive landfilling thing. I'll get right on that.
All right, so we finished the topics. Because of time, I want to open for questions before we have closing. There are more questions to address. So the first one, it's about Marvin, for you. It's regarding how is composting related to social and economic justice? Do you want to give us an overview of that? What your thoughts? Can we do it in about 1 minute?
Yes. Okay. I talked about there are 2 incinerators in my neighborhood. They put these incinerators in poor neighborhoods, but the wind does not segregate or discriminate. So we're all breathing in bad air. The alternative to incineration is composting. So we must continue to make sites available and make composting available for residents and community members.
Courtney, do you want to say something, Enzo? Enzo? No, okay. Courtney, I think you could cover this one. Do you know of any examples of multi-scale composting policies or initiatives for cities or towns that can be replicated for community, residential, urban farm scale, or small business composting? And if any of you have anything to add to it, please feel free to jump in it. Courtney, 1 minute.
Yeah, well, California has the tiered system, which I had mentioned earlier. Breaks it up by the square footage or the amount of cubic yards of material you have on site, but also breaks it up as the material type that you're dealing with. So for the on-farm, if you're just dealing with agricultural materials, that's an effective way to have a multi-tiered or multi-scale regulations on composting. But also looking down at the local level with zoning and municipal codes is a great way to deal with the multi-scale issue as well. So if we look at where facilities would be allowed to be placed, I think we should also look at size when we look at zoning and permitting these facilities in specific areas. So something that's done at this community scale that doesn't use mechanized equipment, cause loud noises, odors, vectors, public nuisances could be allowed or conditionally allowed in all zones, which allows them to happen in resident as well as in more commercial areas. So this on-site or community-based programs can be more prolific. So we see zoning as a really good place of opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks. Marvin, do you want to say anything?
Wanted to just piggyback on my statement when they talked about environmental and social justice issue. The residents in my community already are affected by compromised respiratory system because trash is being burned. When you add COVID on top of that, you have a higher mortality rate in poor communities. So it is up, it is up to us to continue to, once again, educate. I have young people who I've educated on small scale composting who can in turn educate their peers about the benefits of composting. So the road to zero waste starts out with education.
Quick? Okay.
Yeah, just to add on to that as well with the air pollution issue is that where I am, and especially in Oakland, West Oakland, the biggest port on the West Coast, they're dealing with those sorts of air pollution, but also the lead contamination that happens to the soil because of all of the shipping in the trucks. So compost, especially organic compost, is a way to remediate the quality of the soil. So the food that they grow in these neighborhoods that are already marginalized can actually be higher quality food, and you can have better crop yield. So the trickle down of the environmental and the social goes from the air all the way to the soil to the water. So I just, in a lot of these urban areas that are already marginalized, I think that local composting is a really good solution to handling the soil health issue, as well as all of the social issues.
So this question here, I'm going to give that to Courtney and maybe Matt quick. As composting becomes more universal, what's the relationship in the roles of community composting versus industrial composting? Can community composting be scaled for widespread organic collection? Matt, you go first.
I was going to let Courtney go first. Because I think...
No? Okay.
Go ahead, Courtney.
This is an incredible opportunity for partnership. They're both going to scale in different ways because they're essentially different types of operations. So when you're looking at community composting, this is decentralized. That's how we scale. We do little sites every place that there's really good opportunity for closing the distance between the organic material generators and the final compost users. Industrial scales it just a different way and requires different sorts of portions of their operations to make that happen. So they need bigger trucks, they need to drive longer distances. So they, but there's an opportunity for community composters, especially in micro hauling, to partner with these larger scaled operations so that everybody can be meeting their goals and we can do it in the most economically efficient way as well. Matt?
Yeah, that's the super exciting part. I love to see these two groups who really don't know each other, don't work together, providing strengths to the other party. Some of the examples that are happening with community groups doing education, doing outreach, so much education to be done. But again, we aren't going to run out of suitable feedstocks for composting anytime soon. So I really, yeah, sure, let's do it large scale, let's do it community scale, let's do it on site. We're not seeing significant amounts of reduction in organic waste going to landfills. So let's do more of all of it. Let's work together rather than pretending that there's some, difference between the two or false dichotomy of the two. We need all of this. So let's work together.
Thanks, Matt. Next question would be Enzo and Matt. Understanding the barriers to compostable plastic, what are your thoughts about moving towards fiber-based compostable material with PLA? Isn't this still better than plastic material? Enzo, you go first.
Only for specific and dedicated use. Well, you were mentioning PFAS a while ago. Actually, there were problems with PFAS in packaging, which was used as compostable packaging, but it was based on fibers. And normally they use the greasy layers on fibers in order to use it as a food contact materials. And that is very prone. Whereas the compostable plastics in the testing scheme, according to EN 13432, which they have to undergo, there is also a testing, full disclosure of all the compounds which are used in manufacturing, and the testing on toxicology. And so we have it covered. But apart from that, always consider, you should not only consider meeting testing requirements as the precondition to consider compostable plastics. Let's also use the logics. Is there a better alternative, a reusable alternative? You can see, back behind me, there is a better alternative for a bottle, a steel bottle. They are selling bioplastic bottles out there, which make really no sense. Also because we will have soon a target, which is legally binding in Europe, to collect 90% of PET bottles by 2029, which implies deposit return schemes. So once you have got a DRS scheme in place, you can have clean bottles and have closed loop mechanical recycling bottle to bottle. So does it make sense to use compostable plastics to replace PET? As I already said, I only consider them as suitable for specific dedicated applications in tight connection to separate collection to improve and maximize participation in separate collection systems.
Have anything to add?
Yeah, I don't think I do. I think the question was really about compostable fiber with PLA. And again, we can get very wrapped around the axle with different material types and fiber-based stuff. Oregon, a couple decades ago, tried to do just a fiber-only approach. It's a big, complicated world, and the manufacturers really, really, really want to be pushing compostable plastics. I think we have to have a really honest dialogue between the manufacturers of stuff, whether it's a fork or a cup or a plate, and the end of life. And if end of life isn't prioritized, I don't know what the value is. So a lot of work. And Enzo's right. There are going to be niche applications. I don't disagree about the bags. Even our friend Will, who couldn't be here today, the most stalwart anti-compostable plastics person I know, you could probably talk him into using some bags for collection, because it provides some usability there, some practicality. So we have a long way to go. I don't know if, honestly, it's interesting, it's so complex and we have so many things. I don't know if this is something we should be spending as much time as we do on it. There's a lot more programs to get going, food waste collection. We don't recycle a whole lot of coffee cups or plastic forks now. So yeah, let's do more on that, but let's be really careful we don't screw up other existing systems. Let's really understand what we're doing with this stuff. So.
We'll do a question here for you, Marvin. They changed it. Where is it? What are the first steps to start local community composting? A minute.
I apologize. The first steps will be getting the appropriate training through Institute for Local Self-Reliance. You must be properly trained on composting, getting your recipe together. For every 1 part nitrogen, you're going to add 3 part carbon, and understanding what that means, how to properly macerate your materials, how to flip your piles, building your system, getting all the right advice and the right training, and educating yourself. Once again, everything goes right back to education. So those are the steps that I would say. Reach out to composting experts like the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Follow their compost Bible and don't defer from it. Yep. Cool.
I'd also add that community outreach is a really big first step to community composting. So figuring out where the waste is being generated and drawing those local connections, and also making sure that you have access to the right feedstocks to build this beautiful recipe that Marvin mentioned, because sometimes you can just end up with way too many greens. And also the volunteer engagement, so that you have enough people to actually do the work at a small scale, but at least with one dedicated individual who is going to manage that project. Obviously, I think that really just gives leadership and community ownership to it, which are also really amazing first steps.
Thanks, Courtney. On that one, they have a question here. If there are educational materials that would be recommended to use with the youth and community that can be shared, that we can use as a reference to build upon, do you have anything that you want to share with that?
Go ahead, Courtney. Yeah.
Keeps mentioning.
We're going to say the same thing. So go ahead, Courtney.
It's the Neighborhood Soil Rebuilders Program.
Yep.
It's on the Institute for Local Self-Reliance website. I also did want to mention that the California Alliance for Community Composting that will be implementing the Cal Recycle grant program. Part of one of our deliverables will be creating a California-specific training curriculum for composting at a small scale. And that will be available by the end of February, open source on our website for anybody to download and to reuse as they see necessary in their communities.
Thanks. The next question is direct for you, Matt. It's about, the person says, I was told by New York City Sanitary Department that collection was the easy part, but the availability of sites and facilities was the main issue for the city urban area. Land shortage, any thoughts? Do you know anything about it?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the New York City program. I've certainly been out there. I've talked to some of those guys. We did a training, a U.S. Composting Council training out there in Brooklyn. Got to tour some of those sites. I mean, everybody wishes there were more capacity, more sites, but the fact is there are sites within reasonable hauling distance of New York City right now. They're not getting enough material, so I don't disagree. I disagree with the statement. I don't know firsthand. I don't do a lot of work out there, but collection is not easy. Collection is hard. Getting good, clean material at enough volume, having enough, as Enzo keeps giving us these fantastical participation levels, we're nowhere near that. Even in cities that have been doing this for decades in most of the U.S., we have a long way to go to get participation rates up, to get, as Courtney mentioned, route density up. So I think you'd find that the collection part is actually a lot harder. The outreach, getting people to put the right stuff in the right bins consistently and get it to a place is a much bigger problem than citing a new facility. Both McEnroe Farms and the site on Staten Island would love to have more material at the moment.
Forgot, Enzo, you work directly with the city of New York City. Do you have anything to add to it?
Well, I did not actually work with them, but we had consistent exchange programs. They came to Milan quite a few times in order to get the details, because, you know, the program launched by Bill de Blasio about New York City Zero Waste 2030, and then they had the technical implementation to tackle. And so they came to Milan. I was there. I was discussing with Mrs. Garcia, who is the deputy mayor tasked with environmental management. We went to Staten Island, where they have got the composting sites. That's impressive. Of course, it's a very big challenge. And the only way to have it won is to make the system user-friendly, as I was making the case when I was discussing Milan. As I told you, without systems to make the system user-friendly, we wouldn't have achieved 87% capture of total organics from the city, which is impressive for a city with a density of population of 9,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. So that's it. We have to make the system user-friendly, but there is the possibility to make it user-friendly. Of course, discussing the details would require another conference, and I will be happy to take part in that once you have it.
Thank you. So we're running out of time now. I would like to give every one of you 2 minutes for close remarks. There are some other questions that we couldn't get to it, but let's see, give it 2 minutes for each one of you. Courtney, do you want to start? Ladies first.
Thanks, Anna. So as far, I think, is just final points that I would like to communicate is that navigating compost law and policy is a lot of jargon. So we've created a resource with the Sustainable Economies Law Center and the Institute for Local Self-Reliance called compostlaw.org. It tries to make a lot of this information palatable to the average person. It also is a great launching pad for if you're trying to spearhead new legislation, if you're trying to weigh in on existing legislation, participate in contracts and bidding processes, no matter what scale that you're at. So it really is a great resource that you can go to if this has inspired you to start some compost program in your state, in your community, either at the small scale or you want to weigh in more heavily about things that are happening more at the larger scale. So we hope that that can be a valuable resource to you, and please reach out to us if you have any questions at all.
Courtney. So let's go alphabetic order. Enzo, you're next.
Yeah, no, just to remark that composting is pivotal in zero waste programs. And it's not only the quantitative contribution to very high recycling rates. You know, Europe adopted a target, a legally binding target to meet 65% net material recovery. So we will have to discount the process rejects from recycling and composting by 2035. And without including the organics, there is no way to get that high. But also there is a more important operational angle, because once we get the organics out and we minimize the percentage of organics in residual waste, we can sharply cut the collection frequency of residual waste, which first of all, it's a terrific saver of money. And secondly, the lower the frequency for collection of residual waste, the higher the participation in separate collection of the dry recyclable as well. Just by doing that, reducing the collection frequency for residual waste, in Milan, we increased the separate collection of the dry recyclables with a further contribution of 10% to total recycling rates. So it's important. But apart from that, always remember, I am an agronomist. I'm always happy when I know of new composting programs. So let's launch a program, make an agronomist happy, and always think about that.
Agronomist happy. I like that too. All right. So RS Marvin, you're next. You're mute. You're mute.
I apologize. Before I was on mute, I would just yell, compost around is a terrible thing to waste. Everybody knows I love to call the amazing garden that I serve the Wakanda of South Baltimore. The reason why I make that point, because one of my favorite quotes from the Black Panther movie was, "Why the foolish build barriers, the wise create bridges." Let's continue to build that compost bridge so that everybody has, no matter to your economical level where you're at, that they have access to composting, that we train our young people, we create those we inspire the next generation of environmental justice warriors, and we educate. Please reach out to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance for best practices for composting, their webinars, their videos. I'm doing virtual tours due to COVID-19. So if you didn't remember anything that we said during this whole presentation, compost, learn so you don't have to burn, starve the incinerator, feed the soul, feed the community. Thank you.
Your turn.
Only a fool would try to follow Marvin on that. I mean, I'm with you on the compost bridge. I got the compost fever. I just would like, I want to thank NRC for their persistence in putting this on. It was a long road across the compost bridge to get here from March to now. I appreciate everybody taking time from their day to pay attention. I hope you got inspired by Marvin and others on this. Now is the time, as we see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is the time to start thinking about programs, developing your plans, doing your research, assessing all the guidance that's out there, whether it's Institute for Local Self-Reliance, the U.S. Composting Council, the European Composting Network. There's so much information out there. You just got to put the hard work in to plan the programs, get the support, and move forward. So I thank you all for coming and really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. It was a great panel. Leslie's with us now. So we have incredible perspective, different things. And remember, CalRecycle said we had more compost in the last 4 years, and they're expecting 5.5 million tons more coming up. So we need to find how we can deal with the composting process. And with COVID, we have a lot more package with more boxes, and the food are distributed in package. So it's more challenge for us, but we are in good hands. NRC, thank you very much. Everybody that participated, thanks for working with me on the organization. Stay safe. Have a wonderful holidays. Leslie, on you now.
Thank you to our amazing panel. Yes, that was Great. Welcome to the last session of the conference. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm glad to see that you were able to find your way to the right room. So this product ban, and Kelly Denning from the Center of Biological Diversity is going to be our moderator for our session. So Kelly, take it away.
Good. Hello. Welcome. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Kelly Dennings. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a campaigner with the Center for Biological Diversity. The Center is a national nonprofit conservation organization with more than 1.7 million members and online activists. We work through a combination of science, the law, organizing, and creative media to protect wildlife and the wild places they need to thrive. I want to acknowledge and honor that I'm currently on the traditional territory of the Powhatan, Monacan, and the Cherokee. As Leslie said, I will be our session moderator. Just a little bit about me. I worked as a local government recycling coordinator for 8 years, then went to work for the state of North Carolina for 5, and spent 3 years doing recycling in the nonprofit arena. I started with the Center in 2019 to develop and execute campaigns focused on rights-based solutions from voluntary family planning to an equitable solidarity economy, both of which address how the effects of population pressure and inequitable consumption impact our environment. So we all know the statistics, but let me ground us a little bit. So the United States is 5% of the world's population, but uses 30% of all resources and creates 30% of all waste. The average American has an environmental footprint 60% larger than most Europeans and nearly 700% larger than the average person in most African countries. And each person makes nearly twice as much waste now as a person did in 1960. So we have to turn off this consumption tap and reduce waste at the source. In today's session, you'll hear about the Break Free from Plastic movement, how to advocate for a single-use disposable foodware ordinance. You'll learn about new policy models that support reuse, and you'll learn about a campaign working to design for waste prevention. So our first speaker today is going to be Christy Key. She is Gaia's International Coordinator and U.S. Executive Director. She helped to spearhead their engagement in the Break Free from Plastic movement and in addressing the issue of ocean plastic pollution through investment in grassroots organizing, upstream policies, and community-led solutions. I'm going to ask Christy to hold on. I'm going to read everybody's just quick little bio and do a smidge of housekeeping. So after that, our next speaker will be Chris, and she's an independent zero waste specialist, educator, and advocate. As the Zero Waste Commission's chair, she designed and facilitated the public outreach and input gathering efforts for the city's 2019 landmark single-use disposable foodware and litter reduction ordinance. Next, we'll hear from Miriam. She's the policy director from Upstream and a leading architect of local and state policies aimed at reducing single-use plastics in packaging. Prior to joining Upstream, Miriam was the California Director of Clean Water Action, where she developed a program on waste prevention and launched Rethink Disposable. Finally, Laura is a second-generation zero waste community organizer. In 2019, she became the program coordinator of Save the Albatross Coalition that focuses on advocating connecting bottle caps to containers as a means to prevent marine debris. You may have looked at the schedule a week or so ago. Unfortunately, Kate O'Neill, who was supposed to speak in this session, had to back out. But I am really excited to be with some killer women working on this work, I just gotta say. So, minor item here for housekeeping. You can check out the speakers' full bios on the conference site. And I hope that you're all enjoying this virtual conference technology. So if this is your first session, which I doubt because it's the end of the conference, but each speaker is going to have 15 minutes to talk, and that's going to include time for a little bit of Q&A at the end of each talk. So please be putting your questions in the Q&A section as they're talking. But we have saved some time at the end for a panel-like discussion also. When you see me, this is both for the audience and for the speakers, when you see me pop back up on the screen, that means the speaker has maybe 1 more minute to talk before I'm going to start asking them some questions. So that's a gentle prompt for our speakers to wrap up. And we ask that you put your questions in the Q&A section, not the chat function, so that they can be upvoted. All right, that was a lot. I went quickly. So with that, we'll begin. If we can bring Christy back up, and I am going to fade into the background.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Kelly said, I am Christy Keith, and I am the International Coordinator of Gaia, and I'm also part of the steering committee of Break Free from Plastic. And so I'm here today to talk with you about Break Free, which is a global movement to stop plastic pollution for good, and it was formed about a little over 40 years ago now. Next slide. So plastic creates pollution all along its life cycle. And today you're going to hear folks talk about different aspects of work on plastic pollution. In Break Free, we work on plastic pollution at the point of extraction, petrochemical extraction, also production, point of sale, so plastic pollution from packaging and from households, so that relies on consumers in the waste industry, and then pollution once plastic is disposed of, either through dumping or burning. Okay, next slide. And one thing that's just a key data point is that plastic production is slated to increase by 40% in the next decade. I'm just going to stop there because I know that some of the other speakers are probably going to speak about the scale and scope of the problem. This is a very significant problem already, and a 40% increase is simply not sustainable or healthy. Next slide. At within Break Free from Plastic, we have a vision that we created together with founders of the movement. And the vision reads that we believe in a world where the land, sky, oceans, and water are home to an abundance of life, not an abundance of plastic. And where the principles of environmental justice, social justice, public health, and human rights lead government policies, not the demands of elites and corporations. And the commitment that we have made as a movement and as an alliance is to creating that future together. Next slide. So our common goal within Break Free is to bring systemic change through a holistic approach, tackling plastic production across the whole plastics value chain, focusing on prevention rather than cure, and providing effective solutions. I promise this is the last slide that has so many words. If you can go to the next slide now, that would be good. Our membership is large. We have 255 core members. Now this is Break Free from Plastic core members. Associate members, there's almost 2,000, and there's individual supporters over 9,000. And so this is membership that has grown significantly since the founding. If you can go to the next slide. Also on our membership, you can see here the distribution of members. So we have members in all of the countries that have sort of the grayish color, and I think that there's different levels, like depending on the number of members, it has a different color, the gray-green. But members in the United States and Latin America and Africa, China, Asia Pacific, and Europe. Next slide. So since I'm guessing that most of the folks at the conference today live in the United States, this is a picture of Break Free from Plastic members in the US at the last national meeting, which was held in 2019, I believe it was December, in Pennsylvania. So you might see some familiar faces there, or people that you would get to know if you wanted to join. Next slide. So what are I want to speak a little bit about what some of the strategies are that are used within Break3 to accomplish systemic change. And here we've got a lot of pictures of different actions that people are taking around the world. If you can go to the next slide, please. So one of the areas, one of the strategies is policy work. Break3 members are very involved in policy work, Basel Convention work at the UN. Next slide. We have members that are also fighting the petrochemical build out. And this is particularly intense in terms of the organizing and the build out in the United States. And so there's a lot of organizing happening in the Gulf Coast and the Ohio River Valley. Next slide. Another strategy that a lot of Break3 members use, and a lot of these are members that also work with Gaia, is building zero waste cities. And so here you can see some pictures from some of the models that folks are working on in Asia. Next slide. Another key strategy for the movement is what we call narrative work. So it's really working on changing how people talk and think about what's said in the press, what's said in publications about plastics. So there's a lot of work, research and publications and communications work. Next slide. Okay, then another key strategy for Break3 is movement building. And here you'll see pictures down in the lower left-hand corner. That's from Africa. Those are folks involved in brand audits. You can see a recent picture on menstrual hygiene. There's been a large menstrual hygiene campaign, International Plastic Bag Free Day, and then in the top left, that's a picture from Taiwan. So there's lots of folks active all around the world. Next slide, please. Changing corporate behavior is another real focus of Break3. There's lots of groups, from really grassroots groups that get involved in brand audits to global organizations like Greenpeace that are involved in the corporate work of Break3. And I think it's been one of the powerful ways in which Break3 has been able to link groups doing work on the ground to groups that are working on corporate campaigning within boardrooms. Next slide. And one of the key strategies that people may have heard about is brand audits, where we actually will collect materials on shorelines or in other places where pollution accumulates, and then count where are those polluting items coming from, and then use that to create a report. So this year's report was just released, and it looks at who are the top polluting brands. And they generally, for the last 3 years, it's generally tended to focus on the top polluting brands. The data that we collect has shown that Coca-Cola, Unilever, Nestle, PepsiCo, Mondelez, these are the top 5. Next slide. So I want to speak just for a moment about what it means to be part of Break3 from Plastic. Because if you would like to join, you would be agreeing to support the vision and abide by the principles of the movement. You are invited then to join Break3 from Plastic campaigns and activities. You can start your own campaigns and activities under the Break3 from Plastic banner. And you can connect with and ask for support from your efforts from other Break3 members. If you can go to the next slide, please. So if you would like to get involved, some of the types of campaigns that you would get involved in is conducting brand audits with a peak in September, and that's the report that was just released. You could be involved in hosting a screening of the story of plastic. There's a Break3 from Plastic, plastic-free campus program that's year-round. And you can start your own campaign or join other members' campaigns and share it with folks. So this is, if you become a member, there's lots of different ways in which you can get involved. Next slide. So as I said at the beginning, I am the international coordinator of Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. And Gaia and BFFP have a very close relationship. We work to unlock potential together to build power. And if you can go to the next slide, please. Our work includes working on some of the local transformation efforts, the zero waste city models, working on system shift, particularly at the policy level, and supporting the movement building work. If you can go to the last slide. So that's it. I hope that this has been helpful for you to understand Break3 and how you can get involved. If you have any questions about Gaia, you can email them to me, and I put the email up here for the Break3 from Plastic US coordination too.
Thank you so much. Well, feel free, we do have some time here for any questions for Christy in particular, but I had a couple. One, I was really glad to see that you mentioned the petrochemical build-out. So this is also a project that the Center for Biological Diversity focuses on, which I'm sure you're familiar. But I don't think a lot of people know about it. So I'm glad you kind of stayed on that, 40% increase slide at the beginning, because, and I think it needs to be more integrated into this narrative work. People just don't understand its, the breadth of it. But so those of us to kind of, there was a discussion in an earlier session where they talked about, should the focus be on consumers? Should it be on manufacturers? Should it be on the pet chem? Like, talk a little bit about that, because I think maybe I know what your answer would be, but.
Well, I mean, Break3 was designed to have multiple entry points and multiple strategies that put the focus on different aspects of the supply chain. So that's what I showed at the beginning. So I would say, first of all, it's not an either or approach. The best way to go after the plastics industry, this is a huge industry, is to come at it from all sides, right? As Break3's leadership, when we first started the campaign, we looked at what are some leverage points. Asia is often blamed for plastic pollution to the ocean. It was really important to support organizing in Asia by folks who are implementing solutions so that they could show that it's not actually the responsibility of Asian cities, it's the responsibility of the companies that are pushing their products out. That's where the brand audits come in. And then the corporate work, of course, is really important in that context. But if we just work on sort of what's happening with supply, once supply is there, but there's huge sort of overcapacity within the petrochemical industry to produce plastics, right? Because they are no longer using some of those same materials to produce fuels. So there's like a growth in supply, and that's happening at the production side, and we don't campaign against the production side. Then we're going to not, the companies may not be wanting to buy all the plastics, but there will be ways in which the polymers that are created are going to make it into the world. And so that is when the petrochem work really got more integrated into Break3, when the analysis of what was happening on the production side was sort of became more visible, and it was needed to help support, people felt like it was important to help support the work at, fighting facilities here in the US.
I'm going to go with one question that's come into the chat, and it's not the top one because I'm going to keep the top one for the end. I think it'll be applicable to everybody speaking. But can you talk more about the plastic narrative and how people talk about it in the press, and talk about plastics in the press? And then we'll move on to the next speaker.
That's interesting. Wow, I'm wondering about confirmation bias, because I think it depends on what press you're looking at. I believe that Break3 has helped to shift some of the narrative. I think that there was a time when the narrative was about, there's a problem of people littering, and then all that stuff gets into the ocean and we have this huge problem. And I think that now corporate accountability and responsibility and liability for the stuff that they're generating is more visible in media articles, and the need for shifting of packaging, and I think that there's a lot of press that's given right now to bans, plastic bans, and of course those can be challenging in some communities, but I think it gets a lot of media attention now, and there are a lot of bans globally. And then I think the other thing that we at Gaia track is waste trade and plastic that, you know, gets shipped between countries. And there's a decent amount of press on that and problems with recycling when recycling just means shipping it off to Asia.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was perfect timing. Let's bring up Chris, our next speaker, and I am gonna fade away. Oh, you're still on mute.
There, no, I'm not.
Perfect.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Christy. That's really inspiring, and it's I think that now it's a good segue into what I'm going to talk about. And I'm actually happy I'm not following Miriam because she's a hard act to follow, and she was such a big driver, as was Gaia and Break Free from Plastic, in getting an ordinance like this passed. So with that said, if people are not aware, Berkeley did a landmark ordinance that's called the Single-Use Foodware and Litter Reduction Ordinance, and it was passed in the beginning of 2019 and went into effect at the end of March, right after it was recorded, and it's a phased process. So a lot of people participated in this process, which I think is the strength of it. And I do want to give a shout out to the elected official who was the author, Councilwoman, now Vice Mayor currently, Sophie Hahn, who was just reelected. And of course, Martin Bork, who is the Executive Director of the Ecology Center, which has been around over 50 years. And he's been on board with Ecology Center for 25 years. And also Heidi Obermeit, who is our recycling program manager at Berkeley, and she's the city staff person that really has shepherded a lot of this once it got passed to the Public Works Department and city management to administer. So next slide. So I think that this really is the key. It's a guiding principle of partnership, and partnership really is the core of the vision here. This process started with advocates and experts, in which I'm including many of the environmental organizations, as well as Martin, as well as Miriam Gordon, who works in policy. So many drivers in a really progressive community that is vested in its history of progressive ideals and making them happen and putting them into action. So Berkeley is a really wonderful ground for this. And the people that came together to make this happen, it just shows you that it can happen. I know it's Berkeley, and so people say, well, that's Berkeley, but Berkeley did it and other people can too. And we did it through groups of advocates and experts and the Zero Waste Commission, which I was chair of during that, and worked with another commissioner, Annette Paluca, who is on this call, credit where credit is due. We coordinated all the outreach and did the public consultation and input gathering. We have community organizers here. We have an amazing staff and some really good operations in place. And again, supportive council members, including our Mayor Araguin, who was also just reelected. So I think we're slated to keep moving forward with more policies like this. So the goal was really to make it work for the business community, make it work for consumers and customers, which was actually that was the easier part of it, and then make it work for the city with the staffing and the operations and how this could happen. Next slide, please. So this was the reality of what many other people have talked about, but I had the opportunity to go down to Southern California and see a facility that is actually a secondary sorting facility. So Berkeley sends, after it does its first sort with a community partner of community conservation centers on site at our own transfer station, then this is sent to Los Angeles, where they sort again and glean between 30, 35, maybe 40% of what they are collecting, and then they sell that mostly in domestic markets, and then this is the residual. So this is all going to landfill, and that's actually Berkeley's. They showed me the piles, and that's me working on the line and sorting. So it's, if you've ever sorted on a line, you realize it's fast and it's hard work and it's difficult to pick out what's good and bad, and plastics are really, really the bane of your existence on the line, figuring out what's worth anything. Next slide, please. So this is the ordinance. Let's see, I'm having trouble reading. So the first phase was as simple as this, is turn to an opt-in, an on-request, and a self-service model for all the accessories. As we know, that already helps. Those are easy steps toward reduction and changing behavior. And then after that, the vendors also had to provide all of the coded bins to go in the front of house, so that people could sort on their own. And that was going to be a recycling bin, hopefully a 4-bin system. But we do have dual stream here. So we have a black bin and we have 2 recycling bins for paper in one, plastic and bottles in the other, as well as our compost. And our compost facility, which is about 56, 60 miles away, maybe 70, in the Central Valley. It is Recology, and we do accept bioplastics there, which set us up for why we made a material switch, which I'll talk about next. So also they went ahead and put in place that the disposable foodware purchased by the city for any events had to be certified compostable. And that took effect March of last year. Next slide. So phase 2 took effect the beginning of this year, and that was actually switching to compostable foodware. And it had to be BPI certified. That was the best way to go, a great way for the city to be able to handle vetting what ware was compliant, and also that it couldn't have any added toxins, fluorinated chemicals. And then also that's when the charge for the takeout cup, hot or cold, went into effect. And that was where we started with this ordinance. It was going to be a little bit more ambitious and try and include all foodware, but we got so much feedback during the process of the public input and outreach that we really were looking at the culprit being the amount of cups that are being thrown away, both hot and cold. And so the customer had an opportunity to bring their own, or to ultimately use any kind of reusable that the restaurant or food service provider could provide. And that was going to come into effect on July 1st. And that's when reusables were going to be mandated. On-site dining, even one seat, anywhere where you consume on premises, you would have to offer a reusable container. And with all this would come technical assistance, mini grants, different things to help the vendors transition into compostable foodware, into reusables. And also there would be some exceptions made. So this was really set as governance by exception, really reaching for what we thought was going to have the best effect to achieve most of our goals, but knowing that with Berkeley, we really had some other concerns that we'd have to deal with our stakeholders. And I say was supposed to. This all did happen, but because there's a 1-year enforcement period on each phase, nothing has been enforced. And of course, in the time of COVID, things have been greatly affected by how businesses are making decisions, even what businesses are open, and the pivot that many people had to take to survive during these times. Next slide, please. And so this process was, I feel really strongly about how well this process was done. Basically, it started before it got into the city's hands, before it started being the process that we really started to do the outreach. And that was through a group of advocates that was largely being led by Martin Bork at Ecology Center. And the next step was to find an engaged and passionate elected official that would help champion this. And I think that that's a really important step that has to be taken, is you have to find your champions, both in business and in elected positions. And so the ordinance was being worked on by a group, an authoring group, and I've mentioned several of them already. And then it went before council, and council took advantage of what they have set up over the years, which I think is brilliant for any city, is Berkeley has over 30 commissions, I believe. And so council decided that the best thing to do was to refer it over to the Zero Waste Commission and have them work on a several-month process of listening, education, input sessions. And during this time, basically, it was laid out what the ordinance was, why we needed it, and what solutions could be put in place. And Rethink Disposable was part of that also, and they're just an amazing program. And usually what comes up out of these is the businesses saying, this is going to cost me money, cost me customers. Rethink Disposable has tons of case studies that helped us to say you will actually save money with reusables if you convert. Because our goal really is to move Berkeley from a throwaway culture into a reusable culture. And that feels like a heavy lift, especially during COVID, but that's actually the future. And BYO, Bring Your Own, has a place in that too, but we need to make it easy for people. So this went on. We extended our public comment sessions for 4 meetings. We held public events in the city that were at different times of day, different locations, and different days of the week so that we could try and get as much input as possible. The business districts participated in talking to their constituents that are in each business district. We have a handful of them that are high generation areas in Berkeley. And we also did an online survey. So when all of this process finished and we had to make the presentation to council, we had to come back, our subcommittee did, and we came back with our recommendations. And what I think really worked well in this case is that Vice Mayor Hahn did not wait. She did not wait until this came back to council with these recommendations. She participated, as did the mayor. They participated in listening at these meetings and answering questions. And so the ordinance was kind of a living document during that period, and it was being retooled. Also, I know that council, Vice Mayor now, Hahn, she met with businesses. She had a very open door policy. And this was probably the most important thing, is all of our business outreach and listening to what the concerns were, because Berkeley is an expensive place to do business. The rents are high because of our Silicon Valley creep over the last 10 years. And also Berkeley has a living minimum wage, and that is now up near $20 with the health benefit added. There was a tiered structure, and so when this was being introduced, we were at our 3rd tier, which was coming into hitting $15. So we clearly were dealing with a very nervous business community, and you don't have to convince the advocates that this is important. We didn't have to even convince the Berkeley population that it was important to do, because we have a lot of early adopters here, and so that was really helpful in our community. But we did have to look for our stakeholders that needed to be considered in a different way. Next slide, please. These are some of the responses. I think they were largely favorable. There were more than this, and I sat through enough meetings to hear some of the more outlandish ones, but it was a listening session, and so it's all good practice to hear everybody's point of view and know that you really need to figure out how you're going to address the majority of the problems, but then also pay attention to some of your special circumstances. Next slide, please. So this details the outreach process, but I've kind of gone over this already. But I will say that if cities aren't structured where they have advisory bodies, citizen advisory bodies, and mind you, everyone is an appointee by an elected official that's on a commission, and they're all not paid. So it is a lot of hard work, but it does afford a certain level of responsibility and authority to be part of this process and know that council is relying on us. And I think that the citizen input is extremely important if you are trying to make laws that you want people to be able to follow. So next slide, please. Kelly, are you telling me I have 1 minute left? No. Anyway, so we made recommendations, and the recommendations made it in. We do have we have a disabled community. We're the birthplace of civil rights, free speech, and of disabled rights. And so we really had to do a lot of listening to businesses, and we therefore came back with some different solutions and retooling, and also working with pilots and phasing in, what would be larger citywide plans as we went. There's certainly trial and error in this. Next. And as I just said, we did listen to the disabled community's input, which was largely about straws and bendy straws. but we still were able to change to make sure that there's a certain amount of bendy straws that were kept, but they were compostable. We do accept those. And then also incentivizing BYO, which is really challenging right now, but we do know that charges on things impact behavior far more than discounts. But there is room for discounts when you're dealing with disadvantaged communities, and that's the same for BYO. Next slide. This is some of the input. I think I've covered it, so I'm hoping that you're reading it. But we did pay attention, and we did try and address everything and let people know they were being heard. Next slide, please. So yes, all the questions that many have been answered in the other sessions. Again, I don't believe that a bin switch is going to save us. We're still hauling them around, and we're hauling them quite far. But we know the problems with recyclability of plastics and the different polymers, and we also know that many facilities don't take compostable, and we're still using something once and throwing it away. And it's very, very confusing and requires education constantly. And it requires that there are some more guidelines around what the visual aspect is of a compostable, so that people can tell on the line. I love Matt Cotton said something about the scenic route to landfill, that by the time it gets over to the compost facility, it's still going to get trucked away to landfill if it's being pre-sorted out or isn't breaking down fast enough. Next slide, please. So the city opted to use BPI, and we addressed the staff concerns. They were very much a part of it, but Public Works really felt they could make this happen, and they allotted some money for this. Next slide, please. And we listened to our businesses about how we were going to go with bulk containers. Again, COVID's affecting that. I do have to point out that that's Top Dog right there. It was there when I went to Cal at UC Berkeley many years ago. They actually said that people throw things at them because they have a lot of drunk students come in. So that was one of the funniest ones on reusables. But we're still pushing for reusables and durables. Next slide. This is some of our information that was sent out, and you'll be seeing this. And the next slide. Afterthoughts and challenges. Well, there's COVID. There's grace periods. We've had some backsliding. Plastics over compostables. And staffing is an issue. We have to be realistic about our staffing and about, are you really going to enforce, and who's going to do that? And then departmental cooperation. Go for it, but hopefully you can get some. Next slide. And there we go.
Thank you.
That was a council meeting right there, just so you know. We had a really active attendance at our council meetings for this. It was great.
Thank you. We definitely have a top question here, but if you don't mind, I want to make sure that we get to all of our speakers and give them the time. And I think we'll have time at the end to come back and talk about the pandemic, and each speaker may be able to address that. So thank you so much, Chris. Berkeley is definitely leading the way. If we can get Miriam to come up next, and we'll turn. All right.
Hey. Well, thank you, Chris, for framing up my comments, because I'm really going to be talking about how we move on, what Berkeley established and how we move from there. So I just want to say I'm so happy to be part of this esteemed panel. And next slide, please. And I just want to make sure that you are all familiar with Upstream. We were originally founded as the product in 2003. Our mission was to support and scale extended producer responsibility. And we established 7 product stewardship councils across the country that focused on 14 different categories of waste, and was successful in the time that we were involved, from 2003 to 2015, in enacting 70 product stewardship laws. And when we started focusing on plastics and packaging around 2012, we pulled together a group of advocates, plastic pollution advocates from across the country, to basically try to convince them that we should be enacting EPR laws for plastics and packaging. But in the process of convening these groups, we learned a lot. Our main learning was that a waste management approach to the problem of single-use plastics and packaging wasn't going to solve the ocean plastics problem, and likely was going to cause some regrettable outcomes. So two things happened as a result of that group convening. One was that group became the founding group of the US portion of the Break Free from Plastic movement. And the second is that we realized that we wanted to go all in on solving this particular problem, and that the solutions lay not in managing the products at end of life, but rather source reduction solutions, that we aren't going to be able to recycle our way out of the ocean plastic problem, because a lot of the materials ending up in the ocean are food and beverage packaging, and those things aren't inherently recyclable. Even if they're made of recyclable materials, they're usually too contaminated to be recycled. We realized that the real problem here is our throwaway culture, and that what we needed to do is to move upstream in the life cycle of products and focus on source reduction. So we rebranded as Upstream and have been focusing on supporting and scaling the reuse movement ever since. Next slide, please. Now, looking at the policy, which is what we're here to do, I basically look at plastic pollution policy and single-use product policy as having fallen into three different buckets at this point in time. One are the single-use plastic bans. The next are the laws that mandate that products, particularly foodware, be recyclable or compostable. And then there are the circular economy laws that bring in the concept of EPR and also focus on recovery and recycling and reuse. There are good things that have come from these different laws. We've been able to get rid of some really bad actor plastics like polystyrene. The single-use plastic bag bans have gotten rid of these bags in the environment and also promoted reusable bags as the alternative. And these laws are making our products more easily managed at the end of life. But there have been some regrettable outcomes as well. Single-use plastic bans that just ban the plastic enable other single-use materials to take their place. And often these materials are no better for the environment. They may just transfer the harm from oceans to climate, to resource depletion, to loss of biodiversity, all kinds of problems associated with cutting down more trees to make paper packaging, growing more products, to make agricultural-based products without great benefit at end of life, because a lot of these products can't be recycled and become contaminants in compost. Next slide. So really what we need to address are these regrettable outcomes. We need better solutions, and what we've come to acknowledge that the real problem here isn't single-use plastics, it's all single use, and the need to change our throwaway culture. Next slide. So in terms of policies that we need now, we need those that will reduce all single-use products as much as possible. So we aren't just solving the ocean plastics problem, we're solving all the problems associated with single use. We know that reducing single use and moving to reusable, refillable products is always better for the environment. We've been deep diving into life cycle analysis and research on this topic. We're about to come out with a paper that shows that reuse wins both from an economic lens and also an environmental lens. And since 2018, we have been working with networks and coalitions all across the country to change what we do from focusing on end of life to focusing on upstream source reduction policies. Next slide. So the Berkeley ordinance was a really great example. It was the first out of the gate, and I'm so grateful I don't have to explain it to you because Chris already did that. But what I would say is that we started with a city ordinance because what we have found with previous plastic pollution policies is that a grassroots approach has worked best in the U.S. in the last few years. After years of trying to pass a statewide plastic bag ban and a statewide polystyrene ban in California, advocates starting in about 2008 just switched it up and started focusing on building a movement of local ordinances that would then create enough pressure to achieve statewide solutions. And that has been effective, and we're using that basic model. We have been using that basic model since we started working on this in 2018, although now we're starting to see opportunities at the state and federal level. So could you advance 2 slides, please? So I would say that as a result of the Berkeley ordinance, we saw 7 jurisdictions enact similar measures, enact the cup charges, mostly in California, and 1 in Vancouver. And we also have had 5 jurisdictions that adopted the disposable free dining policy. And just before COVID, we had these policies teed up and ready to go in New York City, close in Los Angeles, and in 4 Bay Area counties. We were making great progress, but COVID has created a bit of a hitch. So if you could go back 1 slide, sorry, I didn't have this in the appropriate order. So what we've done since COVID is we've been focusing on a more what we call COVID-friendly legislative agenda. We're finding that, well, of course, our comprehensive foodware reduction laws really won't have a lot of legs in this environment when our food businesses are so decimated. But it has been the delivery companies, takeout and delivery, that has been where most food service has shifted. And the delivery companies are making huge profit off the backs of our restaurants. And so there is more legislative appetite for regulating in that space. So in our COVID-friendly legislative agenda, we're focusing on takeout and delivery with the ask first and opt-in for accessories policy. That basically says that restaurants doing takeout have to ask the customer first, and online ordering systems have to provide customers with an opt-in for accessories, so that in both cases, the utensils and other accessories that most of us don't need coming to our homes, the default is not to give them out unless requested. We're working on a new policy that will bring reusables into delivery. I don't have time to go into that, but it basically applies the same idea of a charge levied for the single use in the delivery section. In delivery, if you order your meal in single use, you would actually pay for it, and that money would be passed on to the restaurants operating on the delivery platform that provide a reusable option. So it incentivizes the restaurants to provide a reusable option. We'll be coming out with this model in the next few months to share on our website and through our networks. Cup and container charges, we believe, still has a place here as long as people are doing takeout, and we've been able to bring reusable cup and container systems into the takeout world that alleviates the worries during COVID about bring your own. So it's important to have that infrastructure there. We're also focusing on what new restaurants look like post-COVID when they apply for business permits. We want to take that idea that the Berkeley ordinance started, that dining on site should be disposable free, and make sure that new restaurants are designed correctly from the outset. And so we have a model policy for that. This is all on our website. And then we also are looking at focusing on other industries. So I want to turn your attention to the groundbreaking law enacted in 2019 in California that as of next year says that the hotel industry in California won't be allowed to give out single-use toiletries to hotel guests. And finally, we are looking at all the other business sectors where there are reuse and refill options right now, and saying that state laws should be enacted that target having refillables or reusables in each of those industry sectors. 25% reusable or refillable by 2030 is our starting bid. I see I'm running out of time, so I will just, can you advance 2 slides, please? I will say that, you know, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, just really briefly, has some great stuff in it. We're working on bringing source reduction more heavily into this. Next slide. And we work to grow and support the reuse movement through policy. Next slide, please. Through local coalitions, reuse coalitions, and by seeding more reuse coalitions that are led by others. And back 1 slide, please. And we also have established national reuse networks and forums for different stakeholder groups. So we have a national reuse network for NGOs, and we have a government reuse forum for government agencies. You can find them all on our website, in addition to policy trackers and more great information about reuse businesses. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, Miriam. Just in the nick of time. So I do want to ask, because this is one question that has come up now for the last 2 sessions, and we do have a minute or so here to have you answer it. You know, in particular to COVID, you know, many of which may not survive the pandemic, do you think it's the right time to move forward on reusable foodware policy?
Yeah, I do. I think particularly the low-hanging fruit of the opt-in and accessories on request, that is a way to address this single-use plastic pandemic that we're experiencing along with the COVID pandemic. I know there's a lot of local government on this in this meeting, and I know that you're all, and most areas are experiencing a proliferation of single-use packaging from takeout and delivery, and that's a way to get rid of the stuff that people don't actually need. So it's pretty obvious to everyone who does that kind of ordering that it's a waste. And if we put forward these other policies like cup and container charges and establishing targets for reuse and refill in different industries, we may not succeed this year, but it is time to start the conversation. And I think it's also very important to talk about what the new food businesses are going to look like post-pandemic and start talking about that disposable free model. So I definitely encourage bringing all of these kinds of policies forward at this time. They save local governments money and they save businesses money.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let's bring up Laura, our last speaker, and all right.
Hi, my name is Laura Anthony. I'm with the Save the Albatross Coalition. And just a little bit about the Save the Albatross Coalition. It's a bootstrap campaign that is under the Zero Waste USA nonprofit, dedicated to stopping the tide of single-use disposal items polluting our oceans and killing our wildlife, in particular the iconic Pacific albatross. Next slide, please. Now we're talking about marine debris. And so everyone knows about the garbage patch. And so now we have 5 in our oceans. We're going to target more about the Pacific gyre, the one that was kind of discovered by Captain Charlie Moore, who is one of the founders of this organization. And in a discussion, we were talking about, you know, the marine debris in the floating oceans and the wildlife. And the albatross, the liaison albatross came about to talk in the conversation. And this is why the nonprofit existed. Now the albatross, next slide, please. The Laysan albatross is located in the Midway Atoll, which is right in the center of the Pacific Gyre. Now these birds are awesome. They are called the winged ambassadors because they are impressive to look at. They're kind of a cousin to the gulls that we see on the west coast of California, but they're huge. They migrate from the Asian continent to the Americas and looking for food, and they focus on floating items. And this is where we come in with marine debris. Now they look at things that are bright and colorful to feed their nestlings. And so they're kind of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to marine debris, because 20,000 of these nestlings are dying each year with a full stomach. And as you can see here, you see a carcass of a full stomach of a nestling. Now the nestling, there are 3 stages of an albatross. The nestling, when they first hatch, do not have the ability to regurgitate, but the foundlings do, which is the next stage. And when you look at that, this is a nestling, you'll see it, the carcass is full of bottle caps. They literally die of starvation, full of plastic. Now the plastic looks like squid. It looks like it's fish. And so the mothers will come in and force it down the throats. Now the foundlings could regurgitate it, and they regurgitate these bulbous. And when they dissect the bulbous, you'll find fishing nets and bottle caps, tooth brushes, and all that stuff. It's right there next to the birds. So I'm sorry, I'm answering the questions in there too. Okay, so the breeding ground of these Midway Atolls islands are looking right in the middle of the Pacific Trade. They're looking for floating foods, like I said. And the most things that are identical is a plastic bottle. So next slide, please. Now, doing all these audits, the Ocean Conservancy, which is the stats on the left, say that the bottle caps are the 3rd largest identifiable items when picking up at a beach cleanup. Now, I just looked at the Break-Free Plastics, their global brand audit of 2020, and again, number 3, most things picked up in the litter is plastic bottle caps. Now, plastic bottle caps are made out of polypropylene, which it's actually similar material that these surgical masks that we're finding everywhere in our litter as well. So the most common things. We're starting to get more of these surgical masks because people just throw them on the ground. But these are a design flaw. So our campaign is to make the companies responsible, and doing brand audits, identifying who the companies are, and looking at the brand audits global report in 2020, you'll notice the 3 main companies, which are Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Nestle. You can move to the next slide, please. So the marine debris you'll find is 75% of the marine debris you'll find in the gyre is made out of plastic. And 80% of that marine debris originates from the land. So this is not stuff coming from the ships that are a lot of misconception that it's these the shipping containers that are falling off, and that's what's the majority of the waste is. No, this is litter. These are it's storm drains, contamination, and you'll find this all right in our bays, and they're just floating right into the gyre. So going with the stream. You can go to the next one too. So our solution to this is to come up with a campaign to prevent these solo bottle caps to be put into the environment. And this is where we would talk to the 3 companies that are in blame. So we're talking to them by writing a letter saying that this is a design flaw, and this is something that you need to fix and to create again. And so what our suggestion is to tether the taps or connect the caps, leash the lid, to put this little strap right on it so that they don't go floating away. Now, our solutions are to create a brand audit in all the waterways, similar to using the Break Free from Plastics brand audit, and so that we should show the metrics, because we can't go to a company to tell them they need to do something without showing them the proof. We have to show them the proof. They're all over the place. So brand audits making the companies responsible for their product from cradle to cradle, creating letter writing campaigns, make it a law. So one law that we tried to enforce in 2018, 2019 was the AB 319, which is by Mark Stone, Assembly Member Mark Stone. And this was to prohibit all retailers from selling beverages with caps that are not tethered to the containers. Well, it failed. But this is similar. This is kind of the law that we would like to see. We would like to see the responsibility of working with these companies to see if they can create a design to tether it. Now, this has happened in the past. I do remember this back in the 80s and the 90s, seeing these sports caps with the tether, but it's a design flaw. So we're trying to work together to create a better product and not to have so much litter. Go on to the next one. So the next way to do it is also the public nuisance lawsuit. While this is kind of jaunting to say that we're going to sue them, this is actually a very smart way of doing it. This is, our lawyer made it saying it's stabs by death by a million stabs. So the public nuisance lawsuit, you need to have a causation, which is the company creates single-use plastics in the public place, fails to stop polluting, and fails to clean it up. This causes the city, the streets, and the parks and the waterways, dirty streets, and parks and waterfronts. It also causes harms to the municipality, and it's also extra money for the employees to clean it up. So by suing the three companies, so Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Nestle, just these public nuisance lawsuits, which are very small, annoying lawsuits, and that's really what Grassroots is all about, is trying to get attention, to get so much attention that they have to actually look at it. If they have one lawsuit in the municipality, there's a public nuisance lawsuit, one municipality, it may not be, it's going to be $1,500, they'll still put money into it to clean it up, but it really may not change anything. But if, say, all the cities on the West Coast do this public nuisance thing, they'll start looking. So the remedies are to order to clean up the mess and pay to clean it up. Penalties will be criminal penalties, unfair practices, and if the public entity sues and wins, they get the civil penalties and the attorney fees go back. So these are kind of interesting ways of solutions to work with these companies to prevent the bottle cap pollution in the first place.
I want to say I jumped in too early, but your audio was going a little bit weird.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and so I was actually very interested in the nuisance laws. So could you just, I'm sorry, that was why I jumped back in.
No worries. I saw you and I'm like, oh, my time's over.
No, it wasn't your time. Can you
Okay.
just talk about this slide one more time?
Right. So the public nuisance lawsuit, it's a civil lawsuit. So it's not a huge one. It is, it's supposed to be small and easy to do. And if a lot of people did it, it becomes really an annoying feature for those companies because they all have to, when someone sues them, they have to pay attention. But if it's not that much money, they just put money away. But if all the cities target this and say the same thing, it's starting to take notice. This is kind of the grassroots approach. But of course, this means that the municipalities have to sue these companies. And that is a harder thing to do, to get the municipalities on board to say that, oh, we're going to sue them. There's only a few things. You just need to prove, that's what the brand audits do, prove that they are a nuisance. They're causing a lot of money for the cities to pick up, and we see their names on it. If we see a green straw, we know that's Starbucks. We automatically know that. If we see a red cap, we assume that it's Coca-Cola. So it's a branding thing to let them know that this is not good for their environment. They need to do better. While they put money into collection, because they are the biggest nonprofits donators to the Ocean Conservancy, well, they are all about cleanup. They're not working on prevention. And so that's what our thing is. We would like to work with these companies with prevention. And if they're not, we have to show a different way. And the public nuisance is actually really clever and interesting way of doing this. Unfortunately, the courts are kind of out, and the municipalities don't want to risk it sometimes. But it's smart, It's easy, and our lawyers are all over this if any municipalities want to do this. And we're looking for the coast. We're looking for the west coast of like California, Oregon, and Washington, and Hawaii, because that's what we're trying to concentrate on.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for going backwards. And
Okay, no problem.
All right. Well, we do have like 9 minutes. So if we want to bring up all of our speakers, and folks can either upvote the questions that are already there. Awesome. Thank you all. So let me ask, I know, Miriam, you just touched on the pandemic a little bit, but this is now the top question that's here. Does anybody else want to address their work in the pandemic and how it's impacted it?
There are many Gaia members who continue to do Zero Waste City work during the pandemic. So that is something that has continued, and there are folks who are providing, sanitation services, essential workers, or recycling, doing street recycling, grassroots recycling. So that continues, although there are impacts because some of those programs are made more difficult.
Great.
I think Miriam's answer to some of the programs around reduction was really wonderful.
Well,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. I mean, we've been through the National Reuse Network and through local coalitions like the Reusable LA Coalition, Reusable San Francisco, and with allies like Chris in Berkeley, and we have a local government network in the Bay Area. Through all of these forums and with help of organizations like Oceanic Global and Greenpeace, we've been working to defend reusables during the time of COVID. There's been a lot of defense work. You may have noticed that, a state you live in had a suspension of bag charges, and now it doesn't. It had many states were about to implement plastic bag bans, and they got put on hold, but those things have been reversed. Maybe your local health department was saying no BYO reusable bags, no BYO cups. There have been a lot of advocates across these networks, not just in ours, but others, that have been working to try to reverse the backlash against reusables during COVID. I know Chris has been extremely active on this in Berkeley. So.
Yeah, the challenges have been that it's hard to figure out who carries the most weight in these jurisdictions. I mean, during this time, it's really the health departments. And then, so if the health departments are saying, yes or no, or something kind of waffly, which is what we found, there was inconsistency both in, say, Alameda County, which is Berkeley's county, and Berkeley that has its own health department. There was a lack of alignment about the language. So I think that what I appreciate very much about the work that Miriam does about policy, it's very much about your language. And that people in times of stress like this, people look for the loopholes. So the customer might be allowed to bring it, which is how the health orders are reading. It doesn't necessarily mean that the stores have to accept it. And that's been a bit of the hole we've fallen into. I know I've run into several businesses that say, my employees are not comfortable handling that. And that's a very slippery slope when we start to look at employees and ask what their comfort level is with our laws. And that goes across all kinds of different laws about letting employees dictate. And I think that's just because we're lacking clear guidance and understanding about what COVID is and how it's carried. But so it's been quite a challenge to, with the lack of information and clarity on how to approach COVID, it's been very difficult. So there's been a kind of a hands-off policy, I would say, on the businesses.
Chris, let's stay with you. You've got a couple of top questions here. How does Berkeley process compostable foodware in reference to phase 1 of the ordinance requiring the city to purchase only reusable or compostable foodware?
Well, it would be the same for any phase, is that we contract with a site in the Central Valley down below Tracy, which is, I think it was about 70 miles away, which is a lot of trucking. And it's a Recology site, Blossom Valley, and they accept bioplastics and compostable foodware. So that is why our ordinance was able to accept it. That's not the same for every, for every facility at all. There's a lot of facilities in the Bay Area that are not accepting any bioplastics, and so that's affecting their ordinances.
And the next question is, who's going to be enforcing your ordinance?
Well, that is the Zero Waste Department, which is the renamed Solid Waste Department, and that's under Public Works. But they already are really pushing at their staff limits because of the compliance necessary for 1383, which is our state AB 1383, which I guess the regulations are. I don't know if they've finally been published or not. It's been a long time coming down the pike, but there are so many mandates and reporting and what's going to have to go into changing operations. So it is that staff. I think they're planning to expand, but there's also been a hiring freeze due to COVID. So that they will be doing the enforcement, but I will say that I understand that this was really always more of a carrot and less of a stick. So some cities are really good at enforcement, like San Francisco, which is city and county, the Department of the Environment. I don't know. I think that there was a reliance on the type of citizenry we have here to probably step to basically shame other people. I think there was a bit of a reliance on doing the right thing and having everyone on Nextdoor out you if you don't. Nextdoor.com, if you haven't seen what goes on there. So.
We have just a couple minutes, but I really like this next question that I think most may be able to answer or have an opinion on. Can you speak to policies or solutions to the overproduction of commercial goods and then stores throwing out items after they haven't been sold? Does anybody have any thoughts on that question?
Is that any product or food? I mean, I'm not sure.
It says overproduction of commercial goods.
Well, that sounds silly, doesn't it?
I have to say that I haven't really thought about, I'm not tuned into how much wasting is happening by stores throwing out overproduced goods. So I just want to thank the participant for raising it and say, please send us some information about it. The only policy solution I have is we can start to decrease consumption by enacting policies that create targets, enforceable targets for making our products more durable and reusable. That was one of the policy suggestions that I offered. That's all I got.
And repairable.
And repairable. Very good.
It would be interesting to learn how it goes, because I know a lot of places after expired, they go to like the 99-cent stores and everything, and whatever doesn't sell there, it's interesting to follow up on that. It is a good question.
Christy, any last words on there?
I mean, I just know that there's corporate campaigns that are putting pressure on companies to reduce their volumes of plastic. And so there's, one would hope that as a result of them trying to reduce volumes, they certainly wouldn't want to see plastic waste from unsold goods. Mm-hmm. So I think that, you would see, as a result of some of the corporate pressure campaigns, a reduction in, plastic that's not, definitely plastic that's not being used. Beyond that, I don't know about specific policy campaigns that focus on this.
I'll just add at the very end here is the center has done a report about grocery store waste, specifically food waste within grocery stores. So, as a huge greenhouse gas emission component there. So, and not a lot of folks have focused on grocery stores. And it's great that you can get them to a reuse agency, but really we shouldn't necessarily be overproducing in the first place.
Kelly, can I say one thing? I just want to say that somebody asked about what's easier to adopt in smaller or larger cities. And I just want to say, you got to know your city. You've got to know your people, know your city, know your facilities, know your operations. There's no one size fits all, but just know your people and reach out and make sure, stakeholder outreach is so important. So.
Yes, I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions, but thank you all for participating. Leslie, I don't know if you're coming back on or anybody's, okay, here she comes. Thank you all.
Bye.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you to our moderator, Kelly, and our fabulous speakers. I really appreciate your time in presenting with us today. So that wraps up all of our planned sessions and speakers for the conference. The conference is not over yet, though. Still be around until 2 o'clock today. So if you didn't get a chance to see them yet, please go to the exhibit hall right after this, and you can click on that at the center of the screen. Once we get into presentation mode, click on that and it'll transfer you over to the main conference floor. Exhibitors are located on the first and second floor. Also, you are welcome to network until 2 o'clock today as well, so that will remain open. But thank you to all of our amazing, stellar volunteers. Thank you to our all of our sponsors. We would not be able to do this without the sponsorship, so we truly appreciate that. And thank you to all of our attendees and speakers, and I hope to see you over in the exhibit hall now. So thank you. Bye-bye.